piece from Father Rohr, Franciscan priest. He's been writing for a while. He's got a lot of books out there. But this one's got a provocative title, and it's titled The Threat, quote unquote, of Unconditional Love. And I want to give a little bit of an intro into this because when we think about unconditional love, generally we have these positive associations. That sounds like a wonderful thing. And yet when we scratch the surface of what actually that means in terms of unconditional love, it's a powerful concept that if we learn a deeper theology and an understanding of God, where we have some corrective lens to perhaps an understanding of God that may be associated with more of the Old Testament of an angry, vengeful God, then we start to move into what Jesus Christ brought to our world, which is that unconditional love. And it's threatening. It's threatening to the world order. It's even threatening to our minds and our egos, because if we think about all those ways that our mind will operate, it'll be there as a constant piece that suggests we're not enough. We've made mistakes. It'll continue to haunt us. And so this threat of unconditional love says we're already forgiven. This is an economy of grace. How do we live into that? So he says, one last thing. I'll set this up with one last piece, which is drawing upon some of the deep psychology that has been presented by Ken Wilber. He's phenomenal for what he's been able to do in his lifetime, and the books that he's written. He has one concept which is fascinating. It's transcend and include, meaning that when we jump to a new level, it doesn't mean we dismiss everything else. It means everything that's happened before us is also a part of this. So here is what Father Rohr says about, he reflects on a book that he wrote, The Tears of Things, the journey of the prophets, as one that ends in trusting God's unconditional love and grace, and uses the prophet Jeremiah as an example. The first covenant between Yahweh and Israel appeared to be bilateral. If you obey my voice and hold fast to my covenant, you of all nations shall be my very own. That's from Exodus 19, verse 5. But the covenant that emerged in Jeremiah's time was unilateral from Yahweh's side. Deep within them I plant my law, writing it on their hearts. Then I will be their God, and they shall be my people. From Jeremiah 31, verse 33. This dramatic change replaces the earlier order by surpassing it, not destroying it. God forgives undeservedly, even after direct disobedience. This is a love that waits and hopes and desires, working towards surrender and trust. It gives us a new covenant that we can actually fulfill, not just perfectly or by ourselves. Only God can fill in all the gaps. Henceforth, there is no such thing as deserving or earning anything. All is grace. Jeremiah 31 is frankly a total changing of the guard. And what is guarded is only the human capacity for intimate, reciprocal love. As many scholars have agreed, the notion of a God-initiated, unilaterally fulfilled divine relationship is the highest peak of any spirituality, especially since most of us fear deep down that we are unworthy of it. It is deeply unfortunate that our interpretation of the Old Covenant is so enmeshed in our dualistic logic of tit for tat that most Christians remain untouched by Jeremiah's proclamation of a spiritual revolution. We remain content with retribution and vengeance passing for justice. We would rather stand outside of love then receive a love of which we believe we are not worthy, or have not earned, or cannot figure out. We think the old covenant at least tells us where we stand, even if it is outside of paradise. We seem to find certitude more comforting than we do trust or love. Infinite love is literally too much for most of us to comprehend. We think we know how to love alone. But how do we know and love together with a, quote, divine another living within us? The answer is by participation rather than performance, riding the divine coattails, as it were. In his aloneness and anguish, Jeremiah saw what a majority still cannot see 2,500 years later. Our refusal to allow ourselves to be loved undeservedly and unconditionally will probably forever be the anguish of every prophet and the burden of every mystic or saint. Jeremiah's scroll of writings was cut into pieces and burned by King Jehoiakim in Jeremiah 36. This is how threatening any new covenant of grace or any new anything is to a world already set in full and determined motion. So I want to explore more of this covenant of grace, this unconditional love that Father Moore is talking about here, because it's powerful, and it ultimately is also deeply into the season we're in and what Jesus came here on earth to do. That we're already forgiven for anything that we've done, anything that we feel guilty about. The economy of grace. It's not an excuse to do bad things and be forgiven for it. On the contrary, we're only going to feel genuinely good if it's aligned with grace, and that we want to do it more often. Jeremiah is presenting an economy of grace that remains spiritually revolutionary because it is a law that has already been inscribed on our hearts. Deep within them, I will plant my law, writing it on their hearts. Then I will be their God, and they shall be my people, says Jeremiah. And yet, we continue to not allow ourselves to be unconditionally loved by God. It's a bold and radical statement, continuing in our modern times, because we also have this tendency to give away our power to external authorities instead of relying on this powerful force already at the core of our being, at the center of our heart, residing with us at our depths. People often ask me about these two different versions of God, about that God of the Old Testament, comparing it to the God of the New Testament, and how those two interoperate. We are presented with two different characteristics about how God can be perceived over the course of time. And I think it's good to know that the Bible was written by many different people over different periods of time, a long arc of history, and what was present and relevant for one generation in time was the best way that they could describe the living God at that moment. So if we are going through that evolution of our understanding of God, we're in a present time where we are still going through that cycle. We're still wrestling this in our own lifetime. Think about this from what we thought about God when we were infants, children, to where we are as adults. We can move into a more mature spirituality when we see the depth of our being, when we understand that grace is there in our hearts already. It's simply a matter of removing all those barriers that get in the way. And that's where Jeremiah, he jumps into this, even though he's in the Old Testament, he understands this new covenant, that there's a fundamental shift. And he's celebrating that divine love, that divine wisdom. Ultimately, this is a conversion experience. for everyone understanding the nature of God, and that becoming more familiar in our relationship. We know because we are in constant communication and communion all the time. No longer shall they teach one another or say to each other, know the Lord. For they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, says the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. And this relationship with God, it continues to baffle the masses these days. The tendency to look elsewhere for that connection. And I believe this is intimately connected with our New Testament gospel reading. Because Jesus expected a bit more at the time that he was living. Because Prophet Jeremiah had lived approximately 600 years before his entry into the world. And with that revolutionary understanding, a reordering of the nature of God that's written on our hearts, I can understand Jesus coming in and saying, hey, what have we learned in the last 600 years? The question becomes, when we're actually sitting with these teachings and understandings, what if we actually are enough as we are? And what if we are actually already forgiven? What do we do then? Psalm 27. It encourages us. It's encouragement for the spiritual journey. That we will find and be sustained by the goodness of God in the land of the living. We're not having to wait. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my enemies. Do not give me up to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and they are breathing out violence. I believe that I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. Now that can also be a big spiritual lesson for us. We want everything right now, instant. How do we wait? How do we rest? Especially when we are in a place of uncertainty. We don't know. And that's where we get back to some of those deeper teachings, the trust. So here we are. Jesus, our mother hen. I absolutely love this because it is so contrary to some of the other images that people hold. When you talk about their image of God, our image of God, Swedenborg says it's the first chain on a link of how we connect to our understanding of God. Our image, Imago Dei. And you can see this in some of the great artwork, the Middle Ages. You look at also, if you've been to the Sistine Chapel, you know that there's this kind of image of a gray-haired man sitting on a throne. And yet, there's always new opportunities to dig through Scripture, look at different parables, and see the connection of what God is for us presently. And when I came across this, like maybe this morning for you, if you haven't read that gospel story in a while, that image of Jesus as a mother hen, maybe a little bit shocking. Like, wait a second. A powerful God being a simplistic hen with one of these common animals, but if we're learning anything these days, it's the power of the chicken. The price of eggs, it's become the conversation everywhere. One real world example this past week, I hadn't done shopping. My refrigerator died. I had to get a new refrigerator. Yes, I got a new refrigerator, but I hadn't gone shopping in a while. Let me tell you, I was at Trader Joe's. There was one last carton of eggs, the last dozen. And it was being ogled by the Trader Joe's staff who was like looking at it. I wasn't about to die for it, but it was like, we're eyeing each other as we're closing in on it. Because I think someone was at the counter and said, do you have any eggs? And the employee was going back to get it. It was, I was able to get the dozen and I inspected it. I can see why it was left there. It wasn't perfect. I checked it wasn't, like everyone does. It wasn't cracked or broken, but it wasn't perfect, so that's why it was left there. And even at the garden church, they've got, 17 hens now. Articles are coming out about people who have hens in their backyards, and they're becoming like the local source of community for the neighborhoods. People are talking about not eggs by the dozen, but by the single, like $1 an egg plus. And even at the farmers markets, I mean, the price is outrageous. So, if you don't think that this humble little chicken is powerful, just go to the grocery store. But I want to get to the spiritual piece because that's even more important. And you look at all the ways that historically, especially in the Old Testament, God is an out there, powerful thing that we can't even touch. We can't even approach that power. And, when the Israelites are escaping from Egypt, there's a pillar of clouds of lightning and smoke and fire, and you can see the presence of this power that's there. So to get from that to this, that's quite a leap of faith. And yet, this week, not only with, I'm going to call it divine providence, with red wood showing up right here to be part of my sermon, I've seen the power of this parable in action these past several weeks. Jesus as a mother hen. We've had, let me just read that part because I want to conclude on this. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings? And you were not willing. See, your house is left to you. And I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. And we do need to unpack those words carefully, because Jesus was speaking to the Pharisees. And we also have that parable that fits in well. He calls Herod a fox. So we got fox, we got chickens, we can understand the parable of what happens when a fox enters a hen house. The fox was trying to get the chicks in the hen house. Jesus was always relatable on the most basic way. And so that's another level of where I see this power, but then it continues, because not only is it beyond gender, it's beyond powerful forces, it's the humble chicken, the hen. But what does a hen do? And how does a hen behave? That force that binds us all together is our relationship to one another. And if we're talking about the power of this a couple thousand years later, about using this parable, I have witnessed more in the past few weeks about how we can all enter into this feeling of what a hen might feel about her brood and protecting them and keeping them safe from anything out there. It unleashes for me and unlocks this whole piece about divine grace. Everything is grace. We are forgiven already. And we also protect those who we love fiercely. This power of unconditional love, when it's flowing through us, we want to protect all those things that are good and right in the world. And I've seen this in radical acceptance of people that we otherwise might minimize or diminish, or like the Good Samaritan, or others that were not the Good Samaritan, who avoid certain things. But this week I've seen the power of community to come together, to pray together, to see the spark of divinity in someone, because that's a value of a community. And so I want to celebrate and lift up all the ways that this parable is also how we can see that working and operating in our own lives, how we too can be like Christ and be like that mother hen who's protective of those who cannot protect themselves. May the Lord so help us all, and remain open to that constant stream of love that was given to us so freely.